And to me, one of the interesting things about privacy is you're not just responsible to the organization that's paying you. You're also responsible to the people that are providing that information. And so I look at it as I am a steward and I'm responsible to our students, our employees, our partners in the community, et cetera, anybody who's sending that information in, as well as to the university, and to make sure the data is handled securely.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another Future of Data Security episode. Today I'm speaking with Michael Sheron, Director of Privacy and GRC at the University of Kentucky. Michael, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Great, welcome. First off, how did you get into data privacy?
It's actually kind of interesting. We had a changeover in our CIO, and he came in, and I was working in network security at the time. We were a very, very small team. And he brought in an intern CISO. And that intern CISO spent quite a bit of time getting to know us, learning our strengths and our weaknesses. And he actually asked me if I would build a privacy program. At the time, privacy was mainly, you would find it like in healthcare institutions and stuff, but they really didn't have any sort of organized privacy on the campus side. So not knowing any better, I agreed and started building a program. And one of the things I learned is you can't really have privacy if you don't have a bedrock of solid policy. So I actually started there with building a program to handle policy. And fortunately, I've been able to turn that over to somebody else who is much more suited and qualified for it. But then the next step is you've got to have a good cybersecurity operations team, which fortunately we've had some really good people running that and working in that. But we didn't have anything to sort of measure how good of a job we were doing. We're doing a lot of ad hoc things. So then I started building out a governance risk and compliance program so that we could take the policy as sort of our foundation and then using GRC and cyber ops as the pillars to support privacy as a whole. So it's sort of been a slow process. Fortunately, I started about the same time GDPR was coming on. And so it was using that as sort of a yardstick to where I think privacy should be headed and how we're doing to get there. And I've been very lucky because I've had the support of our CIO because he comes from a background of cybersecurity. The intern CISO was great and very supportive. Our legal counsel has been wonderful. And we did have a mature cybersecurity program in our healthcare side. And so I was able to get a lot of sort of insight from them and help from them in building it. And now our current CISO has also been very supportive in the process. So I've been very lucky in the fact that from the president's office down, I've had people who have been supporting the effort.
Yeah, it's very important to have top-down support in these big initiatives.
Yes.
And since you've been in the job, there were some major changes. How would you say the data security and privacy landscape has changed since you started?
Sure. Well, I mean, when you think about it, there's just been in higher ed, there's been some major changes. I mean, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which was designed for financial institutions, but higher ed got classified because, of how we handle the financial incentives, et cetera, for students. And so there's been more regulations. I think at this point, all 50 states have passed some sort of law. And being the size of school that we are, we have people from all over the US as well as all over the world who are attending. So at least being aware of their privacy laws and how they define it has, become more important. Before it was really simple, right? As long as you did your PCI, your FERPA, and HIPAA, you're good to go. But now, there's 50 different laws across the US. There's tons of them throughout the world. It's definitely a lot more that you have to sort of pay attention to when you're doing it.
I'm always curious about large universities and educational organizations that have a high turnover of students, that must generate quite an excitement and a variety of data. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's a very interesting piece to me that I think is unique to the nature of universities and that turnover. Any thoughts you want to share on that?
When you think about the fact that we're getting on average 6,000 plus new people every year at the university, and that means that there's 6,000 new data records that are being created at a
Right.
at a minimum. We're ending up with just a glut of information, and everybody is wanting, from philanthropy and the alumni organization, the registrar's office, et cetera. Everybody is wanting to use this data in a slightly different way to do their job. One of the lucky things that I found is that a lot of people at the university want to do the right thing, but where they run into problems is knowing what the right thing is, not necessarily understanding what the laws are and the best practices. So a lot of my time is actually spent working with them to help build these practices. And one of the main problems that we run into is we're really good about collecting data. We're not very good about getting rid of data when we no longer need it. I think that's true of a lot of large organizations. So that's one of the big sticking points for me. If you don't need it, don't keep it, because that's just another thing that you can lose and just another thing that can cause a problem later on.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And of course, we're in that business. I think, in fact, it's so true that some organizations develop solutions that are world champion at increasing the price commensurate with the volume of data. It's almost like a running gag that data doubles every 2 years in terms
Yeah,
of volume.
there's information that we collect that may help a particular group do their job, but it's not necessarily information that we need to keep long term. Right? Like philanthropy may want to know that I have dogs and what breed of dogs because it'll help them raise money down the road. But is that really information that they need to have or that people outside of philanthropy need to have? And I'm using philanthropy as an example because I was just talking to them like an hour ago. I'm not trying to pick on them.
Okay, given all that and the unique environment in the world of academia, what does a modern data security stack look like?
Yeah, so that's where things get a little bit interesting because you're looking at data being spread out, right? It's all over the place. And I made some notes, but obviously the data being spread out is big. Understanding where your data is important. And then you have to be able to classify that data. Because if you don't classify it, then either you have to treat everything as classified or sensitive, or you treat nothing. And both of those are very expensive options. When you look at the cost of an average data breach in higher education, that's millions of dollars plus the reputational loss. So you can't really have a blasé attitude about classifying that data because it's going to be too expensive to protect everything on campus with the same parameters as you should for protected or sensitive data. And then, of course, encryption and anonymization of the data is important. I mean, right, those are magic words in our field. And then you've got to look at what you're using to manage identities. Obviously, a single sign-on, multi-factor authentication are all big for helping manage it using RBAC to get into the devices and everything, so you can monitor who has access, what they have access to, and what they have done. Now, of course, from a more technical aspect, your next-gen firewalls, your intrusion detection and prevention systems, secure web gateways, they're all still important to the process. Endpoint detection and response, securing your IoT, because that's a big one. When you think about the number of students that we have that are coming in, moving into dorms, and the smart devices that they're bringing onto campus and what that can do. And it's not just students. You'll have faculty who are bringing in and they're wanting to hook up their AI assistant or whatever in their office and they're wanting to connect it to your secure environment without necessarily securing that device. So you've got to look at your IoT and what you're doing to protect that, your cloud access security, because obviously we're a hybrid environment. So we still have things on-prem, but we also have a lot in the cloud, just like everybody else. Web application firewalls, your security orchestration and automation response. And then, of course, your backup and your recovery tools. And then you're never going to have enough technology. Everybody will say it's the end user is the weakest link in your security chain. And so you've got to look at how you can reach those. And that awareness and training is an important component. And that's one of the things that when we were setting up our policy program, we included a cybersecurity awareness and training component. And so we've been making a lot of effort in that, because if you can educate the end user, then a lot of your tooling becomes a lot easier. And of course, implementing zero trust. And last and certainly not least, though, is you've got to audit all of these steps and what you're doing to make sure that you're finding your risk, you're finding the weak points in that chain, and you're addressing those to move forward.
Can you share some thoughts on, if we're looking at different types of data, we have structured data, multiple systems and databases, unstructured data files, a long tail of files that are circulating within the organization, both on-prem and in the cloud. What are your thoughts on these two types, and what are some of the biggest challenges there in securing these types of data?
Sure. Obviously, the more structured it is, the easier it is to protect, because you know where everything is. But with things that are unstructured or things that are moving become a little bit more difficult and a little more challenging to identify and protect. You almost have to have an insider knowledge when talking about unstructured data. And so one of the things that we try to do at UK is when we identify our data stewards in the different areas, is we want to sit down with them and we want to talk about how they use data, and as well as the systems that they're using to do it. But if we're able to better understand their business processes and how they're making use of that data, then we're better able to put protections in place. There's no point in building the perfect environment to protect data if it doesn't allow people to do their job and they're going to circumvent those steps. And so we have to have an understanding of what that business process is that they're using that data for. There's no way that somebody can know that in my position for every place where data is being used. And so we try to spend a lot of time with those day-to-day users. And I've been very lucky in the sense that the people I report to have been very supportive in providing training just in how universities work. I've worked at the University of Kentucky for close to 28 years, both as a student employee and as a full-time employee. But it's only been in the last 6 or 7 that I really was able to say that I understood how a lot of things outside of IT function. And that's just from having the opportunity to sit down with some of these people. Whether that's the vice president in human resources or somebody in facilities who is responsible for, the heating and air and how they're collecting data and everything, and how they're using that data to make their jobs function better and help the university, but also how they're storing it and working around it. And obviously, anytime you get with somebody with an entity the size of us, data sprawl is major. It's not so much that I worry, obviously I worry about the data that we have in HR, or the registrar's office or something like that. But I believe that they're doing a very good job with it. And a lot of our enterprise tools are great. Bothers me probably the most are the faculty member or the staff member who's sitting in their office and they're pulling down these large data sets and they're storing them on their local device, or they're storing them on a thumb drive or something like that. And, they're traveling with it. I can't tell you how many little thumb drives I've lost in, 20 something years. So, you know, imagine having 10 years of academic records on something like that and losing it.
Mm.
And that's the type of thing that really causes stress for me anyway.
That made me smile a little bit because in a previous life, I was working in the world of defense and security, and we had the good old glue gun to block the USB
Yeah.
ports and just put an end to that.
Yeah. And I know departments that do that, but we have a decentralized IT structure. And so a lot of it is relying on those individual IT departments. And some are better funded than others. Some are larger and have more expertise in particular areas than others. And others are someone who just has a knack for computers who suddenly has been thrust into this role. I believe everybody's trying to do their best, but sometimes they just don't have the information they need to do that.
Talking about that, we talked at the beginning of the interview about the importance of measuring, having metrics and KPIs. Of course, often there's the world of qualitative measurements. How do you define success in data security? So, what are your thoughts on this? How do you measure success in data security and privacy?
So, when I first started, the only thing that we were really measuring for success is if we had a breach, right? A data breach. And, yeah, but that's like, asking if, your fire department's doing a good job measured by the number of houses that have been burned down. There's a lot more to it. So, we start looking at the other peripheral type, the things that we push into privacy, looking at like third party risk. Who are we sharing our data with? And what are we doing to make sure that that data is secure? And there's some other more difficult measurements, but the number of inquiries that I get from other people as to what's the best thing in this situation, the number of questions that are being asked. And 3 years ago, we started an event called CyberCon, which we started as try to do an outreach. We wanted it to be sort of fun, informative, and make it easy for people to come up and ask questions. And looking at the growth of that over the 3 years, the number of people that are coming into the events who are wanting to participate and wanting to learn more about cybersecurity and privacy. And, we also tell people that, we're willing to come and talk to any organization that they want to talk about privacy, to talk about, what we do and how to make them more secure. And the number of presentations that I have done in the last 6 years has grown exponentially, so that we're reaching more and more people. As far as like hard and fast metrics, privacy can be a little bit difficult in that regard. I mean, yeah, you can measure the number of new records created versus the number of records mothballed, or deleted or something like that, put into cold storage or whatever. But, that's only telling part of the story. And to me, one of the interesting things about privacy is you're not just responsible to the organization that's paying you. You're also responsible to the people that are providing that information. And so I look at it as I am a steward and I'm responsible to our students, our employees, our partners in the community, et cetera, anybody who's sending that information in, as well as to the university, to make sure the data is handled securely. And so the number of people that are asking for steps on what to do and how to protect it is another one of those sort of metrics that I look at personally to help see whether or not we're doing a good job of communicating and evangelizing privacy to the university community as a whole.
You've spent 28 years, I think you said, at UK, right? Can you share a defining moment in your data security career?
So I'm not necessarily sure that there's a defining moment. There's some things that made me interested in the field. And, my background, actually, I came to the school, changed my major a few times, but I graduated with a degree in theater. And then I ended up going back and getting a graduate degree in theater. And, my interest was largely in directing, stage productions. But I was working in IT at the time to, pay for my tuition and everything. And we had an event. It was years and years ago where a virus was spreading across campus, and working with a large group of people to get to go out and get to work on it. And it was actually one of my coworkers who sort of discovered how it was getting into the environment and everything. He was a student also at the time. And just that really kind of piqued my interest in cybersecurity in general. And then as time progressed and I started looking at cybersecurity as a whole, and I got kind of a feeling that, protecting devices and things like that is all well and good, but it's not the computer that they're after. It's the information on that computer that's valuable. So I sort of shifted my focus, and that became more privacy related. And so, that sort of led me into what I'm doing now. It wasn't necessarily one individual event. It was more like a series of things that sort of piqued my interest. And, if you talk to my wife, she would always tell you that I enjoy being devil's advocate and arguing. And that's sort of what privacy gets to do, is you get to look at worst case scenarios and work yourself back into, trying to make sure those things don't happen.
What advice would you give to perhaps a younger Michael or someone new starting in data security and privacy today?
Always keep learning. That's the big thing, is read and learn. The environment evolves and it's constantly changing. I spend probably the majority of my day reading, whether that's contracts, for people who we're going to be sharing data with, or new regulations, new laws, what other people are doing, and always have that attitude that there's somebody out there who knows more, and being willing to talk and listen to them. There's a lot of ways to get information and get resources, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I have a great working relationship with our legal counsel. I work with probably like 4 or 5 of them on a regular basis. And I will ask them questions constantly about things because, they're working in that environment. My background, like I said, I was studying theater and I moved into IT. I don't have a legal background, but I spent a lot of time reading legal documents. And so I'm very lucky in that regard to have help. But always be willing to read, learn, and ask questions.
Unfortunately, that's all we're going to have time to cover for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow you along with your work, what's the best place for them to go?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I'm trying to be more active on LinkedIn than I have in the past, but that's probably the best way. And of course, if somebody wants to reach out to the University of Kentucky, I'm listed in the book, the address book. I'm always wanting to talk to, partners in the education community or anything I can do to help.
Great. Thank you, Michael. This has been a really fun conversation. I've learned a lot. Let's keep in touch, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.